When they locked that iron door behind me, I thought I would never see the sun again. The air inside that cell was cold and heavy, and the silence screamed louder than any sound I had ever heard. 27 years. That's how long I was meant to disappear. And for what? Because I dared to dream that my people could walk free in their own land. Because I believed that one day, South Africa would belong to everyone who called it home, but my story didn't begin in that cell. It began far away, in a small village called Mvezo. I was born in 1918, under a sky so wide and endless that a child could believe anything was possible. My father was a proud chief, firm, just, and unbending. When he refused to obey a white magistrate, they stripped him of his title. Our family lost everything, but my father never bowed his head. I didn't understand it then, but that moment planted a seed inside me, that dignity is not something a man is given. It's something he carries within. When we moved to the village of Kunu, I became just another boy chasing goats across the green hills. We were poor, but free in spirit. I would sit by the fire at night listening to the elders tell stories of warriors who fought not for gold, but for honor. That was when I first learned the meaning of courage. It's not in weapons. It's in endurance. My first day at school, my teacher looked at me and said, "From now on, you are Nelson." She couldn't pronounce Ralilala. That name, given to me by my family, meant troublemaker. But now I had an English name, one that fit neatly into a world that wanted to erase who I truly was. I smiled that day, but inside I wondered, if they can take even my name, what else could they take? At Fort Hare University, I saw a new world open before me. It was one of the few places where black students could learn, question, and dream. But when I joined a protest against injustice, they suspended me. They wanted me to apologize, to kneel. I refused. I packed my bags and walked away. It was my first act of defiance, but it would not be my last. In Johannesburg, I worked as a guard, then as a law clerk. I saw the city from the ground, the mines, the shacks, the sweat on men's faces. I studied law at night, reading books by candlelight. Every case, every law, every ruling reminded me that this country was built on chains. Then came 1948. Apartheid, the law of separation, was declared. Imagine a system where every breath you take is regulated by the color of your skin. We had to carry passbooks to move around our own land. We could not vote. We could not live where we wished. They built invisible walls around our lives and called it law. I joined the African National Congress. We were young and angry and full of fire. We marched. We sang. We hoped. But our peaceful protests were answered with bullets. In 1960, in a town called Sharpeville, the police opened fire on unarmed protesters. 69 souls fell that day, many shot in the back as they ran. The world gasped, but our government only grew harder. That night, I sat alone and realized that peace without justice is just another kind of prison. So, we changed our path. We created Umkhonto we Sizwe, the spear of the nation. Our mission was sabotage, not murder. We would strike at the system, not the people. Power plants, rail lines, government offices, symbols of oppression, not human lives. Still, they called us terrorists. In 1962, they caught me. In the courtroom, I stood tall. I did not beg. I did not deny who I was. I said, I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a free and democratic society. It is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. The room was silent. Even my captors looked away. The judge sentenced me to life imprisonment. They took me to Robben Island, a patch of rock surrounded by the roaring sea. My cell was so small that when I lay down, my feet almost touched the wall. The mattress was thin, the blanket, rough. There was no toilet, only a bucket. Each day, I broke stones under the sun until my hands bled. When the wind blew, it carried salt from the ocean, stinging my wounds. When my mother died, I was not allowed to go to her funeral. When my son died, I was told only after he was buried. I wept silently in that cell, but I did not let my spirit break. I read every book I could find. I studied the language of my jailers, Afrikaans, because I wanted to understand the mind of the man who held the key to my cell. I spoke to the guards as humans, not enemies. Slowly, they began to see me not as a number, but as a man. Years turned into decades. My hair turned gray. My eyes grew dim. But the fire inside me, that would never die. Outside the prison walls, my name began to travel farther than I ever could. People chanted, "Free Nelson Mandela," in cities I had never seen. Musicians sang. Children wore my face on their shirts. And I thought, maybe, just maybe, the world was beginning to wake up. Then one day, they came to my cell and said, "You can go home." But there was a condition: I must denounce the struggle. I must give up the fight. I looked them in the eye and said, "I cannot be free while my people remain in chains." So I stayed, and then, on February 11, 1990, after 27 years, the gates opened. I walked out, hand in hand with Winnie, into a world that had waited for me longer than I ever imagined. Cameras flashed, crowds cried, and for the first time, I felt the warmth of sunlight on my face as a free man. That I told my people, "I stand before you as a humble servant." I did not ask for revenge. I asked for unity. Freedom was not yet complete, apartheid still breathed through our laws, through our hearts. But I knew peace cannot be built with bitterness. The years that followed were a storm. Negotiations, protests, threats, the constant fear of war. But I held to one vision, one South Africa. Not black or white, but human. Finally, in 1994, that vision became real. For the first time in our history, every South African could vote. Black, white, rich, poor, they all stood in lines that stretched for miles. Some people wept as they marked their ballot. When I voted, I thought of my father, my mother, my son, and every soul who had died waiting for that moment. When they told me I would be president, I did not feel pride. I felt peace. I remembered the men who had beaten me, the guards who had mocked me, and I knew what I had to do. I invited them into my government. Because if I could not forgive, then all those years in prison would have been for nothing. That a year later, in 1995, South Africa hosted the Rugby World Cup. For decades, rugby had been a white man's game, a symbol of division. But I wore the green jersey of our team. When I handed the trophy to the white captain, the crowd chanted my name. Yet it wasn't me they were cheering for. It was for the miracle we had become, a nation healing. That I served only one term as president. I could have stayed longer, but I didn't. Power must always end where purpose does. After leaving office, I devoted my life to education, to children, to peace. Because freedom without knowledge is fragile. That I in 2013, my body grew tired. But I looked at my country, free, alive, imperfect but hopeful, and I knew my struggle had not been in vain. That it always seems impossible until it is done. Those were my words. And now, they belong to you. No matter who you are, or what stands against you, remember this: courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep walking despite it. That I was locked away for 27 years. They took my freedom, my family, my youth. But they could not take my soul. And when I finally walked out of that cell, I did not carry hate in my heart, only hope, because forgiveness is the only thing powerful enough to truly set us free.